John, we are live.
Oh my gosh, we're live again. They let us back in here. Can you believe
Hey,
it?
thank you, Liam.
Man, I'm pumped. I'm pumped to chat about games today. You got game, Dylan?
The Ecom game. That's maybe one of the only games I got, but it's a good thing we're talking about Ecom, I guess.
It's a good game to have.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm excited about this one. Thanks everyone for tuning in. For those of you who don't know, we have a podcast that drops weekly on Thursdays, Ecom Scaling Show, and once a month we do what we call Ecom Scaling Show Live, which you're in right now. And it's a way for us to go deeper on a topic and also give you a chance to interact with us and ask questions. So today we're going to be talking about how to win the D2C game that your brand is playing. And so the goal for today really is to I think the best way that I like to explain it is that a lot of brands out there are doing oftentimes what I call random acts of marketing. And they're kind of stealing from these different games. They're stealing from little tips and hacks, disjointed tips and hacks, fragmented tips and hacks that they hear from fellow ecom founders, various pieces of social media content. And in reality, the brands that scale fast and profitably, there's actually a tried and true playbook that aligns with a set of three games, which is what we're going to dive into today. So we're going to walk through each of these. For those of you who don't know, I'm Jon Blair, founder of Free to Grow CFO. We got Dylan Byers, founding partner at Aplo Group. And here's the agenda. We're going to run through kind of five things here. Number one, understanding that there are multiple games. This is where this all starts. Two, talk about the concept that different games require different skills, different teams ultimately, executing different playbooks. And then we're going to go through the three major D2C games that we at Free to Grow CFO and Dylan and his team at Aplo Group see time and time again. The first time purchase game, the high SKU count game, and the high LTV game. So let's dive in by starting with the games of consumer. So, Dylan, I've got my thoughts and opinions on this, but let's start with you. Why do you think it is prudent to look at scaling a D2C consumer brand from the perspective of dropping it into the right game?
Yeah, so I think the biggest reason is that basically any of the games you play, whether you're a consumable product business, a clothing and apparel brand, a durable goods brand, all of the tactics can work to grow, but there are certain tactics for each kind of game that generally help you build the most durability and predictability into increasing your odds of future compounding. And I think one of the biggest risks when trying to scale your brand is that we often will see brands trying to grow in a category that are trying to play the wrong game, essentially. They're doing the things that a business that technically is still an e-com but has fundamentally different unit economics, product make mixes, so on and so forth. So making sure that you can remain focused on the things that are most likely to help build that durability and compounding engine into your brand, we view as super critical. How about you, John?
Well, yeah. So, from a high level on the financial side, these three games we're going to go into, um, the reason why this framework is so important from the CFO standpoint is because these frameworks drive towards a specific outcome. And in its simplest form, it's that as we scale ad spend, we're trying to increase total contribution margin dollars. And in reality, you can't do that without understanding game specific nuances of new customer contribution margin dollars and how they change as you scale, and returning customer contribution margin dollars as they scale. So if you think about it, we go from, I was actually having this conversation yesterday with a marketing guy, um, and he was asking me, he's like, hey, you keep talking about CAC and new versus returning customers, but what about blended MER? What about total contribution margin dollars? And I was like, we total contribution margin dollars is what we care about. We're just going one level deeper and we're breaking it down into new and returning because you attack those, you optimize those in different ways. And furthermore, as it relates to today's conversation, we actually have to attack each one of those new and returning customer contribution margin dollars differently based on the game you're playing. You cannot attack them the same. And that's why it's so important. And in reality, this concept of games is something that kind of we've developed together, Dylan, talking for the last year. We've always done this. You guys have always done it, but we're just kind of starting to put some names to it, right? And in reality, it just starts to make me realize the more and more that we look at scaling businesses this way, the more that it's just a simple way to think about the levers that you should pull. You talk a lot about on the Ecom Scaling Show that you can only focus on a few highest leverage activities. These games and these playbooks will help you focus on the few highest leverage areas of the game you're playing. That's the point of all this. So you don't get stuck just executing on these fragmented random acts of marketing that may or may not work. Let's dive into let's take this a step further. There's different, what we're kind of like getting to here is that there's different paths for different games. Dylan, like, what are some of the important things for people to understand about why these different paths are so important?
Yeah, I think that like as we get into some of the examples in the coming slides, it's more about what to do in terms of like being in different, depending on what games you're actually partaking in. But essentially, the reason why you have to avoid playing the wrong game is because there's opportunity costs in pursuing that if that's
Mm,
not going to be the thing that builds durability into your brand. I'll give you like one kind of high level example. If I am a uh, first time customer dominant business, really low LTV, most of my contribution margin dollars are coming from new customers every single month. When that occurs, it doesn't mean that you that you uh, can't do some of the other tactics that some of the other games can take advantage of. Most commonly, these first time customer dominant businesses will have to go and basically do more channels faster, so wholesale, retail, so on and so forth. If you're a high LTV supplements brand, it doesn't mean you can't do that. It just might mean that's not the best thing to do. So it's just important to kind of always remember that all of the things that you can do might work. Defining work is a whole can of worms, but it's about narrowing the focus down to the few things that you believe have the highest potential ROI for the business over the long run. And luckily, like we kind of discussed here, there really are a few kind of like core best practices depending on the category that you're in.
Yeah, it's not a mystery how to scale a brand profitably from the standpoint of what financial metrics you need to move in the business. It may be a mystery of the exact tactics that your brand should execute on, but it's not a mystery of what KPIs and metrics you need to move as you scale. And I want to, a slide or two back, you put a point on the deck, Dylan, that I think is really important, which is like in the early days when you're a very small brand, you don't have to worry about this as much. Like there's not as much of a difference in the scaling game, but as you start to grow, this actually becomes increasingly important. And I want to say one other thing too is that your game, because after this we're going to get into the three games, but the game your brand is playing, it's only one of these three games. You don't play multiple of these games, and you have to abide by the rules that govern each game. And what dictates the game that you're playing? It's basically a combination of your unit economics and your new and returning customer contribution margin profile over time. And you kind of can't really change those things. We're going to get into some tactics where you can enhance them, but a lot of this is driven by consumption patterns, like consumer behavior, consumer consumption patterns within your product category. And so I just want to say that up front, you don't really get to choose your game. Now, what I will say before we get into the first game is that if you understand this game concept, you can launch a new brand knowing on the front end what game you're going to play. And that's really important because if you do know on the front end what game you're planning on playing, you can bake in, right, the unit economics and the new versus returning customer contribution margin profile that you want to play the game with. So, but that being said, what we're about to go through now, the three major games in D2C, even if you're running an existing brand, you can take what we're about to show you and you can optimize the game that you're playing. And the result should be you can scale faster and more profitably. All right, let's get into game number one. Dun, 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 dun. The first time purchase game, or sometimes what you'll hear me and Dylan on the podcast call the new customer dominant game. So, Dylan, before we get into some of the kind of strategies and tactics that you can use in this game, can you describe what the first time purchase game is?
Yeah, so first time purchase game is functionally a brand that heavily relies on the profitability after ad spend from new customers to basically meet their P&L requirement as a business. Maybe there is some LTV, but it's usually very small and it can't really be relied on as the core lever to grow the business and compound over time. Some of the best practices in terms of in terms of like scaling this game is firstly accepting that you don't have LTV or meaningful LTV, and basically coming to the realization that unless you fundamentally launch products that have completely different LTV curves, which very rarely actually works, by the way, it's usually built into the kind of brand and the product that you sell. You often have to do two things once you're kind of getting into the seven to low eight figures to actually start introducing keyword durability into your brand. Firstly, is channel diversification often needs to come earlier here. Why? If you're a supplement brand or a food product and you have really high lifetime value, people come back and keep on consuming, you have LTV built into your ecom experience. If you don't have LTV built into your ecom experience, it doesn't mean you can't scale super high on first time customer. You just often have a larger single point of failure on the first order profitability of your funnel. So you actually want to build LTV in by going and get LTV by having those wholesale retail partners who come back and buy from you again and again and again and build durability that way. The second one is focusing on a higher volume of new products. Basically, like if you think of your single meta funnel, your single Google funnel, or whatever ad channel you're running or channels you're running for a various offer, if you view that as a single point of failure, you can simply just have more products that work on these channels to get some diversification that way. I think that depending on what you're selling, going one route before the other can sometimes make sense. If you have the free cash flow to do it, maybe you can do both effectively at once. But compared to the other games, these two initiatives tend to be the thing that has to be done sooner to try to decrease your odds of having down years and continuing the compounding.
Yeah, so a couple things I'll say on this game from the CFO standpoint. If you're not proactive on channel diversification and channel diversification primarily, but maybe also new product launches, um, this game can stop suddenly. I have seen. I was the CFO, one of our early clients at Free to Grow CFO. We scaled from 2 million to 35 million in a single year, and we thought we were taking that brand to 100 million, and they were playing the new customer dominant game, and it just stopped. It came to a screeching halt the following year. The and then that brand started scrambling for channel diversification. It should have happened sooner, especially because most of the general progression, and this doesn't have to be the case for your brand if you're a first time purchase brand and you're listening right now, but the typical progression I see is D2C, then D2C plus Amazon, and then D2C plus Amazon and physical retail. The physical retail one, that takes time to break into. You don't just break into Target or Walmart or some other big box retailer overnight. You can't just flip it on like you can Amazon. That takes months and sometimes years. So you got to get out ahead of this. And on the finance side, you have to have a CFO on your team that can help you financially model, not just on your P&L, but on your balance sheet and your cash flow statement, how your financials are going to change as you start expanding into physical retail and wholesale. Everything changes. How much inventory you need to buy changes. The order amounts that you're getting from retailers changes. They oftentimes now have payment terms, so now you have accounts receivable, and then margins change. You've got to be able to do what's called three statement financial modeling, and so a CFO is critical here. Now, another thing that I want to mention, and this is something you talk a lot about, Dylan, on our podcast, which is that let's talk about inventory risk in we'll talk about this in each game, but let's start with the first time purchase game. Placing inventory POs is way riskier as you scale for the first time purchase game, especially before channel diversification exists, because you have one channel, new customers have to be profitable. And so if your CAC keeps rising and you start getting squeezed on basically contribution margin per new customer order, and you're stuck with all this inventory that you have to sell break even or maybe even at a loss, it's super, super risky to place incredibly large POs. Again, this is something else where having the right demand planning team, the right ops team, and the right finance team to help you forecast and scenario plan as you're placing POs. So you want to be doing cash flow forecasts and balance sheet forecasts before you approve a big PO. And keep in mind, you need to also consider things like obsolescence risk and even seasonality. So that's another thing to watch out for in the first time purchase game.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. On the inventory planning side specifically, double click on that. You basically have to, when you're placing your POs, understand the probability of your forecast coming true with your inventory plan. And oftentimes with return customers, even if your new customer forecast all of a sudden is your ROAS drops by 20%, something terrible happens. For a high LTV business, you might go from selling those units in 4 months to 9 months. Sucks from a cash flow standpoint, but it's 9 months. I think John and I, you and I have both, we've seen instances where if you're a first time customer dominant brand, ROAS drops by 20%, you're losing money on acquisition. Sometimes you're in a place where all of a sudden you have 2.5 years of inventory on hand. And that's a scary place to be. So that's one of the
Totally.
key risks with the first time purchase game. Beyond the opportunities that you should pursue first, it's definitely something that you have to be super mindful of.
So quick summary before we move on to the next game. First time purchase game means effectively no LTV. First order profitability rule is that you must stay profitable on acquiring new customers. The playbook is product expansion and mostly and more significantly sales channel expansion proactively before you hit your CAC ceiling in the D2C channel. And some of the major risks are managing the business and its changing financials as you expand into retail. Also, inventory planning is a risk, and you just got to have the right team to help you navigate this. But I'll tell you right now, Free to Grow CFO has a number of clients playing this game that are on their way to 100 million. You play this game right, you can scale a brand really big. You just got to know that this is the game that you're playing. All right, game number 2, the high SKU count game. One of Dylan's favorites to talk about when it comes to cash flow management. Oftentimes, I'm going to let Dylan riff on this, but where I see this at most frequently is in apparel. Just in the D2C space, there's a ton of D2C apparel brands. Dylan, before we dive into talking about this game, is there anything else, like any other kind of types of businesses besides apparel, where you see the high SKU count game show
A
up?
lot of a lot of like resellers, but I'd say clothing and apparel is the most consistent one that we see. But like resellers of a bunch of random stuff, whether it's tons of industries, you can do automotive, pet,
But so
like go
like
down the.
a multi-brand store, not a
Yeah,
single
yeah,
brand
yeah.
store, right?
But
That makes
but in
sense.
the case of like owned product, it's most commonly gonna be clothing and apparel. But yeah, I'd
So
say that. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, walk us through this game. What does this game look like?
Yeah, so I'd say that management of cash in high SKU count stores is probably the greatest challenge. And the reason why is because oftentimes there are so many SKUs, so many sizes, colors, variants, that even if you have profitable funnels, if you buy the wrong stuff, you can be like have profit, but effectively have no cash flow. So it's very important. I'd argue that from a finance team standpoint, this game you might need a finance team the earliest. Um, but in terms of like the opportunities that exist, it really is a game of managing inventory planning and like making sure you have that skill either with vendors, partners, or internally. And then understanding that high LTV can exist, but velocity is often a lot lower. What do I mean by that? If you compare and contrast this to like a subscription food company, which might lose a good chunk of money in month one, let's say they lose $40 as an example, they might make that up by month three. With clothing and apparel, if you lose 30, $40 in your first order, you might wait a year in an arbitrary example to get paid back. So oftentimes it's not that people don't come back and buy again and again and again. You may have customers that buy six, seven, eight, nine, 10 times in some cases, but the length of time between orders is often a lot higher. And AOVs are sometimes a little bit more unpredictable as well due to the variance in product catalog. So this game, other than the inventory side, is making sure that you're maintaining break even ish on the front end. That's what you often say, John, and I agree.
I'm
You
gonna
might
get
be
a
a little
shirt, or I'm gonna get a hat
break
that says
even.
break even ish.
Yeah. Like you can maybe go a little bit first order negative. Ideally, you're staying first order positive as much as you can. But most of the profit in these businesses do still tend to be made on the back end. You just can't run it as low in terms of like losses on the front end. And that's not necessarily a problem. Inventory and product planning, like having a product person on your team, which is often going to be the founder in these categories, that really understands the niche, the industry, and is consistently coming out with new, like trending, top performing products. That kind of is the game in this category. What do you think about that, John?
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously, echoing a lot of things that you said. Like, if someone comes to me and I'm auditing their financials and I'm assessing the, hey, you guys are playing the apparel game. Generally speaking, the strategy financially is break even ish on new customers, drive all of your contribution margin dollars every month on returning customers. And the way you do that well is you launch thoughtful products at the right time that your existing customer base wants to buy. And so it's funny because what we're going to talk about next is the high LTV game, which is really the consumables game. But this game is also high LTV. Just like what Dylan said, though, it doesn't come as fast. It doesn't show up in 3 to 4 months after acquisition, such that you can lose a bunch of money on acquiring someone. It may take 12, 24, 36 months for this, the layers of the LTV cake is what I like to call it, for it to like compound and build up. But you can break even ish or lose a little bit of money. You just can't accelerate that loss in total dollars super fast like you can in the subscription game, because it takes longer for the returning customer profitability to stack up every single month. The operators that I see do this the best know their customer. They're apparel product designers that know their customer so well. They know what they're going to want to buy next. And so they're just incredibly, incredibly good at launching new styles and SKUs and launching them at the right time of the year. The reason why inventory management is such a risk in this game is because, one, just what's the name of this game? The high SKU count game. So the more SKUs you have in your catalog, the just in general, the more likely you are to get too long on inventory positions. But the other reason why it's so risky is because when we're talking in the apparel context, if you're constantly launching new products, one, what's the riskiest PO to place? The riskiest PO to place is for a brand new product with no proven historical demand, where you're basically guessing, right, on the quantity to order. So that's another reason why the inventory management is so risky and is such a challenge in this game. But the second reason is, in apparel, you have what I call seasonal obsolescence risk. What does that mean? That means that you might launch a winter SKU, sweatshirt, cold weather apparel. If you do not sell that by the end of the year, you are not selling it on blowout or like clearance in the spring. You're selling that the following winter. So there's this seasonal obsolescence where you are stuck with that SKU for 6 to 9 months waiting for the next season to come around. And so there's this added risk when you're talking about the apparel high SKU count game. I will say that is the reason, or that is one of the big reasons why Dylan mentioned that you probably need a CFO You probably need a CFO in this game earlier than in the other games. It's not always true, but as a general statement, because of the balance sheet risk and namely the inventory management, it can kill a brand that's actually profitable on the P&L. But because of the inventory risk in the apparel game, you could literally just run out of cash and potentially have to close your doors just because of the balance sheet management. And a CFO is like really well positioned to help you with the balance sheet management. So that's the high SKU count game. Let's chat next about the high LTV game. So this is the subscription game, the consumables game. Dylan, walk us through really quick. What is the high LTV subscription game?
Yeah, so often in this category, there's the greatest opportunity to stay D2C focused only the longest. Not always, but often. And the reason why is because oftentimes in these categories, LTV is so healthy that from purely a performance marketing standpoint, and as you spend more and CACs tend to go up, oftentimes there's the most opportunity to continue to have CAC to LTVs that make sense. And then additionally, because you have the high LTV or the cohort retention rates of a consumable, even if you do have fluctuations in new customer performance, it's easier to ride out in many cases because you can actually pull back, temporarily rely on the return customer piece of your business to continue to produce the cash flow and profits that you may need to basically figure out how to improve the funnel. The single biggest metric that is usually overlooked in businesses like this is simply the subscription take rate on order one for new customers. When you look at the LTV, if you're on Shopify, it's super easy to do this under the cohorts view in the analytics tab. You can filter your 12-month lifetime value by a subscribe and save customer or a one-time purchase customer. There's tons of apps that can do even more fancy stuff, but very basic. That's all you need to look at initially. And you may notice that a subscribe and save customer is worth two, three, four times more than a one-time purchase customer in the first year. Obviously, it varies a lot brand to brand, but if you then think about it, I'm doing all this stuff on email. I'm doing all this stuff on SMS. I have maybe loyalty, this, that, the other thing to try to boost retention. And maybe that improves retention 10% here, 8% here, 7% here. If you just moved this one number from like, I don't know, 10% subscribe and save take rates to 70, that literally can be the difference between having a business that's growing like 10, 15% year over year or like 100% year over year in some cases. So obviously it varies business to business and it depends what your subscribe and save take rate is. But at Aplo, we often see many, many brands with subscribe and save take rates in like the 5, 10, 15% range that when optimized can get it above 50. So this game is oftentimes going to be how do you get subscribe and save take rate up? And then once you get subscribe and save take rate up, how do you actually get people to stay on subscription even more? And that's where subscription strategy comes in too. And ultimately CAC to LTV analysis. And a kind of final point on my side is landing page and offer testing is often a focus earlier in this category. Why? Because let's say you're a first-time customer dominant brand selling a durable good, you have one or two or three SKUs. There's only so much you can do with that. And sometimes they don't even make sense to bundle together. You're more so probably selling on the other value propositions. But with subscribe and save focused businesses, there's more opportunity for you to play with price to bring people in on the front end on the first order, even if you lose a bit more money. But if they are on subscribe and save, it's possible that trade can be very positive. And there's lots of opportunities for landing pages and offer testing on those pages to try to improve that metric, be it a subscription only page, be it a new version of your buy box with different quantities or percentages off to subscribe versus one-time purchase. Like even brands that have few SKUs in the consumable space will sometimes spend years every single week continuously testing different variations. There's always something else to try in many cases. So the name of the game here is breaking everything out to CAC to LTV. That's sort of always the case no matter the game you're playing. But in this game, it's the one where you have the most opportunity to meaningfully change the LTV yourself based off of the flow you take your customers through. So it doesn't mean you can't go other channels and it doesn't mean you shouldn't launch new products. It's just often there's more opportunity if you have a low 7 save take rate to get that 7 save take rate going up. In your opinion, John, is this often the case as well? Like from an
Yeah.
order operation standpoint?
Yeah, we this is a huge lever that we've helped brands pull. I mean, we have a number of high LTV consumable brands where we've been able to show them in our CAC to LTV modeling that offering a more aggressive discount for incentivizing subscription opt-in actually pays itself back. That cohort pays itself back and becomes profitable faster than non-subscribers. And so it's counterintuitive because by offering a steeper discount for opt-in, we're losing more money per customer in month one, right? We're taking a steeper loss, which does feel like a bigger risk, and it is, but we can show in the data that it pays itself back faster. And then after payback, there's stronger retention for longer. So that cohort actually over time becomes increasingly more profitable than non-subscriber cohorts. And so one of the things that's key about this game is making sure that you have a finance team that can help you not just do a CAC to LTV analysis the right way, CAC to lifetime gross margin dollars, not lifetime spend or revenue dollars, but also to be able to look at different kind of segments of CAC to LTV, and one of the most important kind of segmentations being subscribers versus non-subscribers. A couple of other tips on this game: never ever run out of subscription inventory. This is a death sentence. This is a death sentence because you're pulling all the levers, you're crushing it on getting people to opt in, you're crushing it on retention and reducing churn. You run out of inventory, the number of cancellations you're going to see, you almost kind of like have to start again at square one. But let's think about inventory risk, because remember, we talked about inventory risk in the first time purchase game and in the high SKU count apparel game. Let's now talk about it in the high LTV consumable game. Ordering for your subscriber base, if you've got predictability in your cohort data showing what retention is likely to be, you can go much more aggressive on holding inventory for that subscriber base. And you should, because it's not like you have to continue. If you over order a bit, you don't have to continue to acquire new customers like the first time purchase game at a rising CAC and lower profitability. You can just wait for your subscriber base to kind of take that inventory position down. So it's much less risky to order inventory for your subscriber base than it is for those other games. So don't be, this is actually a place where like our CFOs can tell you to be like, hey, let's be aggressive on making sure that we have plenty of subscription inventory and we have good reason for it, right? A couple of other things to consider. This is a big one. If you run a high LTV subscription brand on both Amazon and Shopify, and you have meaningful sales on both. If Amazon is just like 10% or less of your sales, your total sales, not that big of a deal. But if it's more significant, you have a special challenge with scaling this game, which is properly understanding the halo effect of your top of funnel spend to converting new customer acquisition on both channels, Amazon and Shopify. And there's not really a lot of good options out there for people to help you analyze this. There's a couple tools that we use at Free to Grow CFO that help us look at like the combined CAC for Amazon and Shopify together and a combined cohort model. The reason why that's so important is because, yeah, it is helpful to look at like the Shopify only CAC to LTV and the Amazon only CAC to LTV, but the reality is that there's a connection on that CAC. And so if you don't look at total CAC, total new customer acquisition, and total LTV over time of both of the channels combined, you actually, what we have found is you'll actually incorrectly conclude that one channel is more profitable than the other. There's a brand that we currently work with that's about 50-50 split Amazon, Shopify. Before working with us, they had concluded that their Shopify channel was just like really unprofitable and they weren't sure about scaling that. We used a tool called Expandify where we're able to pull together this combined cohort model and this combined CAC to LTV. And what we told them like, no, you need to keep spending. And we've been able to help them scale from 800K a month to 4 million a month in about 9 months. And they're printing money right now. So if you have this fairly even split, or you have significant sales on Amazon and Shopify, this is something to watch out for. The last thing that I'll say is that going back to something Dylan said um, earlier, which is he mentioned that this is the game that you can often stay D2C only the longest. The reason is, let's go back and compare it to some of the other games. The new customer dominant game or the first time purchase game, every order basically effectively is a new customer. So if you look at the D2C channel, the addressable market, it's fairly finite, right? Like at any given time, like you can only reach so many people. And as the unreached audience shrinks, CAC goes up. That's just how it all works, right? On the high SKU count game, when you're getting people into subscription, your TAM, your addressable market is massive because your TAM includes selling into the same person over and over and over and over and over and over again. So I've seen on the CFO side, when comparing it to like a first time purchase brand, that you might be able to scale 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 times as big on D2C only if you have really strong retention and people stay on your subscription for a really long time because of that because of the nature of this game. So um, all right, let's get to Q&A. There's some good questions in the chat. Let's see. What's the first one we got here?
What
Aaron.
channels, yeah, what
Yeah, go ahead.
channel do you recommend to start with first when diversifying? Wholesale, marketplaces, retail, any rules of thumb? John, what are you
John.
thinking?
So a big part of this, honestly, this has to be built around, I think, even though I'm a finance guy, the first thing is you've got to do kind of a marketing exercise of thinking through where does your customer exist. And because of that, the path you should follow in diversifying channels depends on your product category. So there are some product categories where you should go Shopify, Amazon, physical retail. There are other product categories where you should go Shopify, Amazon, other marketplaces, and then physical retail. And there's even some where you can skip Amazon and go to physical retail, and Amazon and marketplaces are just not a good place to diversify. So you really got to think about where does your customer exist, right? Where is their more addressable market? You have to look at the competition and who else is in those spaces. And then you also just need to think about what channels can you have a competitive advantage in for your brand. So I'll give you a story from the brand that I helped start and scale, Guardian Bikes. We actually went from D2C to Amazon, and then we pulled off Amazon. And the reason we pulled off Amazon, the economics were okay, but we have a patent on a brake that prevents you from flipping over handlebars. And telling the story about why a brake is safer on a kid's bike, it's a simple story to tell when you can tell it through the right medium and through the right content, but it's very difficult to explain if you have to tell it through the wrong medium. So if you go to a Walmart or a Target kids bike aisle, you cannot tell the difference between a Guardian bike and all of the cheap Chinese bikes. It's very hard, even with PDP and different stuff on the bike, to tell people why this bike deserves to cost more and why this patented brake is safer. So like physical retail, we tried it a couple times. It just never really worked. We just couldn't tell the story. Amazon, the way that like the content is designed on Amazon pages, we also struggled to tell the story. On our D2C store, it was very easy for us to tell the story because we could serve up all the way from the top of the funnel in our ads and then landing pages and then emails and then actually on the site. We could tell the whole story our way, right? In a way that really communicated the value prop. And so to this day, Guardian Bikes is a 9-figure brand, D2C only. We tried Amazon, pulled off. We tried physical retail, pulled off. And so you want to think about not just where is your customer and what does the competition look like and what are the unit economics of those channels, but you also want to consider what channels can my brand uniquely have a competitive advantage and why?
Yeah, I think that your Guardian Bikes specifically, from what I understand, is uniquely set up as a first time customer dominant business, I would assume, given the category, where because of the patents, they're effectively maybe the only game in town or one of the only games in town. And when you are the only game in town for that specific solution. I think you can play all the games a little bit differently. I think in most cases, most brands should also be selling on Amazon because for some percentage of the customer base, they are there. And if you're ecom first, if you're Shopify first or what have you, if you are not on Amazon and you have competitors and you're in a little bit of a more commodified category, there will be likely people because of your ads who go and search for a product that you sell on Amazon. And if you're not there and your competitors are there, you risk that some of your ad spend is actually helping drive your competitors' sales on Amazon. So I think in most cases, going to Amazon is important. There are drawbacks, there's considerations, and there's nuances where it doesn't make sense. But I'd say more often than not, it does make sense. As a consideration. The other thing to kind of think about here is back to the point of durability. So most e-com brands that do go to Amazon, often the primary source of their demand on Amazon is their D2C specific spend, often conversion optimized initiatives on ad platforms, Google, Meta, so on and so forth. So going to Amazon might help performance, capturing some sales that you may have lost, but it doesn't necessarily help with durability if it's still coming from that same singular faucet that you've kind of been running off of. So I'd say going to Amazon in many cases for D2C first brands is more like a base hit. It probably makes sense to go there, but I wouldn't say I've diversified. There are edge cases where you actually can create demand on Amazon alone. Some brands start on Amazon, but for the D2C first brand, it's more of a base hit, less of a really good durability play in many cases. There's obviously some benefits to ranking organically, so on and so forth. But I'd say if you're truly trying to think about diversifying, wholesale is probably where you want to go to actually establish that. Like owned retail is hard. Technically, that can be diversification too. But depending on the size of your brand, wholesale will generally be that place where you get the most durability. Curious if you agree with that one, John.
Well, yeah, from my experience, it depends on the size of the business currently and the size you're trying to get to, right? If you're trying to build your business to 100 million, it's really physical retail that's going to get you there, right?
Yeah.
Or it's going to get you at least the last 50 million, maybe even a little bit more than that. As a general, this depends on product category, okay? And AOV, but generally call it 20 to 25 million on we'll call up to 30 million on D2C, another 10 to 15, maybe 20 on Amazon. So you get to 50, and then that last 50 to get to 100's got to come from physical retail. The one thing I will say though is physical retail, whether you're selling through distributors or you're selling through small independent shops or your mass market big box retail, that you definitely need to consider and weigh the options, the advantages of drawbacks of those kind of sub physical retail channels, because they're very, very different. Like when you're selling through like small specialty wholesale, you're talking about, it's just a different game, smaller order quantities and dealing with a big book of accounts receivable, right? Like I've worked for a brand back in the day before my ecom days where we had 250, specialty wholesale accounts that we sold into, showrooms. So we had to manage accounts receivable for 250 customers. I had a person
Oh,
that
it's the
all they
best.
did was hit the phones to collect money, right? If you can break into mass market, if that makes sense for your product category, and you can get into Target, Walmart, or like if it, big box retail, other big box retailers, that can be huge. Much bigger order quantities. You might have to take a hit on margins. There's other advantages and drawbacks. So definitely weigh them all, because it's not just super straightforward which one is best for your brand. We have a kind of a flip on this question from Elizabeth. Would we say the same thing is true in the opposite way, currently doing retail but transitioning to ecom and D2C? I've got some thoughts, Dylan, but do you have anything to say about that?
I think it's so contextual to the category that you're playing in. Like if you're in like the durable good first time customer dominant world, like I actually think you might be in the better sales channel if you are in in retail already. I guess it also depends if you're doing retail or wholesale because sometimes those get used interchangeably. But Broad, yeah, first time purchase game category. Got it. Yeah, I mean, in this category, given the opportunity for high LTV, I do think that you can make that transition to ecom D2C, and there actually might be a lot of opportunity for that category in that space. Um, but you're going to probably have very different cash flow dynamics than that of the retail kind of game. You're probably going to have to go for a subscription focused funnel, and you're going to the whole game is likely going to be what are the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 offers that I can plan to launch with that I think might have high sub and save take rates, but also not like absurdly high tax, and kind of start from there on the performance marketing standpoint. I do think D2C for like perfumes as a category probably is where you go next after retail. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I mean, there's it definitely I'd be curious to like dig further into unit economics and whatnot, but just purely based on the product
Yeah, sure.
category and assumed consumption, like consumer like consumption patterns. There's possibly a play here on D2C for sure, and depending on the AOV and the gross margin dollars per order, some sort of subscription or repeat purchase, like retention driven strategy is probably going to be key, or else the scale might be limited. And it's not to say you shouldn't have ecom or D2C as a channel. The question is whether you can figure out subscription or repeat purchase or not. That is like how much scale there is in ecom or D2C. Like I work with some brands that like are heavily on the physical retail side, right? And like there's a $50 million brand we work with that probably about 30 million of their revenue is through grocery and physical retail, and
Yeah.
they have an ecom business that's 15 million. Is it a smaller percentage of revenue than physical retail is? Yes, but is 15 million still, is that 15 million sales still generating meaningful contribution margin to the company's bottom line? Yeah, absolutely. And so it's a smaller sales channel, but they've figured out subscription. It's kind of a food and bev slash supplements type product. And so if you can't figure out LTV or like, repeat purchase that's meaningful, then you can, if you can keep your CAC low enough to turn a profit on new customers, you may still be able to add a little bit to the business, but it just may not be the biggest channel in the business.
Yeah, totally agree. And just to add on, like if you don't get subscription, like the epitome of subscriptions is like supplements, because the benefit of supplements is it's usually, I don't know, you get 30 in a bottle, you take one per day. So you kind of know when people want to renew. Then there's food. How often do people eat? And they kind of have like an idea of how often they're or how fast they're going to go through products. Some replenishable categories, it's harder to know as a customer what like renewal rate from a subscription standpoint actually makes sense. It doesn't mean it can't work on subscription. I would still go the subscription route, but you also have to make sure you're presenting a lot of flexibility to the customer in the subscription program. So lots of stuff to think through there, but with a few assumptions, I'd say D2C is probably on the table as the next channel to go into.
All right, let's see. The next question we have here is from William. Is it common for a brand to transition from a first purchase model to a high SKU count model? I run a jewelry brand that is scaled close to 7 figures with one main hero product, but now finding it difficult to grow further. We're investing heavily in launching new products to expand our range. What's the best strategy for making this transition? I want to ask a follow-on question and put this to you, Dylan, to start, and then I can jump in. But like you mention a lot when we talk about first purchase dominant brands, how like one of the lever, although sales channel expansion is probably the lever that opens up profitable scale the most, part of the playbook is also launching new products. Where do you see, because we've actually never specifically talked about this before, but where do you see the line being drawn between a first purchase brand launching some new products and actually becoming a true high SKU count brand?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how many SKUs you currently have, because I actually think jewelry can have decent LTV as you build out that higher SKU count store. So I think that in this case, there is a world where you can kind of lean more into the high SKU count game versus channel diversification first, like order of operations. I think the SKU path is probably the way to go. It also depends if you have like one SKU right now or if you have like eight. But broadly, if you have more, you probably increase the odds of surface area to find more new winning SKUs on acquisition, as well as higher lifetime value through repeat purchase. So I do think that you can try to pursue the high SKU model in this scenario, but I would still have, in the back of my mind, how do I go and do some sales channel diversification? But if people love your products in jewelry, like LTV can actually be super strong in this category. I've seen a wide range of LTV in this category. I think it really comes down to how much are your customers raving fans, and how much do they love the pieces that you make and sell.
Yeah, so my perspective to build on that is not necessarily that you should think about yourself as a first purchase brand versus a high SKU count brand, but instead as you're systematically launching new products, test the impact on CAC and LTV. That, like, because at the end of the day, those are the numbers that you're how is new customer profitability and returning customer profitability changing in absolute dollars over time. You may find yourself slowly over time transitioning to becoming a high SKU count store, but I wouldn't go race after launching just a ton of stuff and saying we're going to play the high SKU count game. I would test launching new products and see, does it drive returning customer contribution margin dollars? Does it actually allow us to control CAC a little bit more on, like, does it bring CAC down a little bit or help us manage CAC with acquiring new customers? Prove out what it's doing to those metrics to determine if you can actually keep playing the new customer dominant game, which is, because let me take a step back. One of the kind of key differentiating factors between the first time purchase game and the high SKU count game, from a financial metric standpoint, is that the high SKU count game generates enough LTV that you do not have to be as profitable on new customers. The first time purchase game is, we're not moving the needle on returning customer contribution margin. We have got to get all of our profit from new customers. And so you got to test how those two things are changing, because if you don't generate the LTV from these new product launches, that means the burden is placed all on new customers. And it's at that point about managing gross margin dollars per order and CAC per order. And so you just got to see how those metrics change. And so in my mind, you got to be methodical about launching new products. You've got to do it in a systematic way. You've got to have a cash flow forecast and a balance sheet forecast before you place those orders, and run different scenarios to confirm you're not going to get yourself into cash flow trouble if you're wrong. And you're going to have to work through this kind of like one new product bet at a time, measuring if it's changing LTV and CAC, and then from there determine if you keep pushing forward on truly transitioning to the high SKU count game. Does that make sense? Is there anything you have to add to that, Dylan?
I agree with everything. I would just say that in while being methodical about how you're managing cash flow and spend with this, it's also important to realize that launching products is also a bit of a volume game, and like it might be the 11th product you try that actually starts to move the needle in terms of either finding that new SKU that works in acquisition, or it actually moves LTV. The other painful thing about lifetime value, and it takes a lot of patience, is that you have to also realize that it might take multiple SKUs to find the ones that actually have like the high repeat rates. And then once you find the SKUs with those high repeat rates, people may not buy them the second they come out. A lot will, but it may actually take many months to start seeing that start to compound. So it's a little bit more of a patience game than it is a like immediate feedback loop like an ad account. And if you've been playing that first time purchaser game, it's a little bit of a mindset shift. And I just think that's
Yeah.
important to acknowledge in the process. And given that there are, longer tails in terms of the payoffs in this kind of transition, it is important to make sure that you're managing the financial side of it, specifically.
Yeah, and I would recommend scenario planning, and because if you're stepping into uncharted territory, right? Like what is the probability of success on launching these new products? You don't know, right? And so I would lean into like what if we launched this many products over this period of time and this is what the PO sizes look like? And then what if sales scenarios look like this? What if they look like this? What if they look like this? And kind of do like a worst case, middle of the road, best case. And you're going to have to operate off scenario planning until you actually get some hard data where you can make a bit of a more data driven forecast. And you're going to just have to get good at balancing risk versus, expected return. So we got 5 minutes left. Anyone have any other questions before we wrap this one up? This was a good one, and appreciate you, Elizabeth, William, and Aaron asking questions. Oh, we got. Let's see. Elizabeth might have something else here. My follow up would be, how do you get a founder on board? It's a cell phone brand. He pours all his money into it, and all the profits go right back into purchasing new scents. Bottles are at least $300. He's having a hard time with there being a learning curve, especially around spend. Yeah, I mean, Dylan, being you're in the agency world, I'll let you take this one first. I definitely have some thoughts, but
I I think that in situations like this, especially if the business is in a healthy spot or growing, I really think it has to be pitched as, hey, net margin is this, EBITDA is this, things are going in this direction. We just want to carve out a sliver and almost think of it as like, acknowledge it's higher risk, higher reward. Like we're gonna burn some money in all likelihood trying to figure this out initially because you are gonna have to wait and see most likely LTV in this category. The probability of being first order profitable is likely on the lower side, and just accepting that there is a investment to basically see how this is going to go. This is the difficult part about entering a new channel is there's no historical data to go off of to actually build a reasonable forecast. So it really just comes down to, like, I guess trying to assess what you think the market opportunity may be, to kind of give an idea of what the upside is on the reward, and then managing the risk on the finance side and making sure that everyone's comfortable with that risk. Because if people aren't comfortable, you may kind of start, take a few steps forward, and then take a few steps back. It's about understanding exactly how long is this going to take, what is it going to cost, and then making sure all stakeholders are on the same page. What are your thoughts there, John?
yeah, this is a great question, Elizabeth, and this is from the finance perspective. This is actually why I was saying when we were talking about the first time purchase game, we were talking about channel diversification. Having the right finance team is super key because it's around it. The reason is because you have to forecast expansion into unknown channels. You have to model that, and there's different considerations across the board. You know, um, and so I again would approach this from the standpoint of like risk adjusted bets, meaning like how the higher confidence we have in the outcomes, the more aggressive bet we can place. Until then, we need to place smaller bets while we gain the data points that we need, right, to gain more confidence and place more aggressive bets. And one of the best tools for that is three-statement financial modeling. But working with someone who understands sales channel expansion and knows how to call out to you, hey, we're going to need to look out for this, and temper your expectations. That's the biggest thing. You don't want to just forecast whatever the founder or you think is going to happen. You want a financial professional on the team who's like been through this before and can also contribute meaningfully to how to think about confidence levels and risk and things of that nature. But again, with the modeling, you want to rely on scenarios. You want to look at worst case, middle of the road, best case, and make sure you can survive the worst case in your modeling. Let's see here. William's got another question. At what stage should a brand consider bringing in a finance professional, fractional CFO? I'm finding it difficult to manage and interpret metrics like inventory, cash flow, CAC, and LTV on my own. Are there any resources you'd recommend for learning how to manage these areas better? Well, I'm biased, but you can check out the Ecom scaling show. No, but seriously, like we have a ton of episodes and we talk about this stuff ad nauseum. The Aplo Group that Dylan runs also has a great podcast channel. So does my firm, Free to Grow CFO. So if you want to do some DIY stuff, dive into that content. We talk about this stuff all the time. As a general rule for when should you bring on a fractional CFO, it's generally at about 5 million in revenue and growing. There are some specific nuances that may make it sooner or later than that. We at Free to Grow CFO tend to work with brands that start working with brands that are doing between 5 and 10. But as Dylan mentioned earlier, it does also kind of depend on the game you're playing and the complexities that you're facing. If you're facing just the CAC to LTV and kind of P&L management of scaling, you might be able to wait a little bit longer. But if you're also struggling with balance sheet management, things like inventory, and you're feeling like you have suboptimal cash flow, if you kind of have all of those things, you need to manage balance sheet, cash flow, and P&L better, then it may be time to look at one. But I'll also say that depending on your situation, what we find a lot of times is that a lot of brands just don't even have the right bookkeeping to start to give them the right view. The bookkeeping is not done on an accrual basis or done in a way that is analysis ready. And so you got to make sure that's on lockdown as well. So, but definitely dig into those podcasts because we talk about this stuff a whole lot. And you guys can find Dylan and myself on LinkedIn. If you guys ever have any questions, shoot us a DM. Feel free to. And we'd be happy to steer you guys in the right direction. So, anyways, this is a great one. You guys all asked really great questions. Really appreciate you joining. This will be on YouTube at some point later for you guys to check out. And feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn if you feel like we can be helpful. And we appreciate you guys.
Thanks, everyone.